And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra. I am well aware that the opening music did not play, sorry about that. But I have a newcomer into the temple, creator of the Beyond Destiny book series. Some of you may know him as Holy Mystic, but he is also known as Ryan Sharpe. How you doing today, man? Or tonight, depending on how you see time.
I'm doing pretty well. Just chilling after a day of near summer weather.
Yeah, I'm getting used to the lack of fall, which means I have to get used to the fact that I don't need my coat. Since I do not have light coats. All of my coats are for it's fucking cold out. Because the forest does not care about the middle seasons. Is the saying. So now, obviously, in a lot of cases, I go into the origin story, but when it comes to doing novels, that's where things get a bit tricky. So, with Beyond Destiny, what I'd like to do instead of the usual origin story I do as tradition in these things, I'd like to pick your brain on some of the media that served as inspiration for Beyond Destiny. What's known in early D&D as Appendix N, or the reference material in like White Wolf books.
All right. Well, I guess some of the earliest inspiration was honestly just growing up and using my imagination outside, and from a myriad of RPGs I played, adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I started in high school wanting to do my own fun little story, I realized nowadays, looking back at it, it never even did get completed. But I took some of that. I took some of the recycled bits of that and let it be transformed into this. And how that even all went about is inspiration also from anime, like a little bit from Bleach, a little bit from what would it be called? World Trigger, a little bit from Dragon Ball Z, but without things getting crazy overpowered. Just a whole lot of inspiration, if you will, from those sources. And the fact that at one point I didn't think there was too much Christian fantasy fiction out there until I actually looked it up, and I was actually blown away by like books like Green Ember and authors like Ted Dekker. So I do want to check their stuff out one day, but yeah. I do know when. You first.
I've covered a few of them, and I think I had a similar kind of moment, but it was with, and this is his name, unfortunately. I'm not making this name up. Dr. Baron Bell, which you hear that and it sounds like a supervillain. I've told him that, but he has a comic series called Dominion: Fall of the House of Saul, which is doing a space opera take on the first book of Saul. And I remember him and I talking a bit about why there's such a bad rap with Christian fiction. And I think it's for the same reason why educational games have such a bad rap. A lot of people in that space focus more, in the case of like educational games, they focus more on the educational part and not on the fact that you're still making a game at the end of the day. And I've seen plenty of really bad Christian fiction. I remember doing a cringe watch of that infamous Bible Man series, which I know it has its defenders, but I'm like, no, this is terrible. This is causing me pain watching it.
Yeah, I remember I saw a little bit as a kid or in my younger years, and I decided a few years ago or so I'd pick up a DVD from a store, a used one, I believe. And I just couldn't believe, like, Yeah, there's definitely. I'd have to have some pretty darn thick nostalgia glasses to see what was so crazy about it back then. But there was one thing I saw a rerun of an episode that I never did find anything about it, and I didn't get to finish it, and it had an interesting premise. Strangely enough, yes.
Hmm.
It had to do with something so bad that Bible Man just couldn't handle it, and he had to activate something called the quote unquote revelation program, which his computer AI advised him not to. And that's where it ended. And I never did get to see what the flip happened. I'm just going to have to find out one day because I don't know what that meant. A
Yeah,
risky life giving transformation? I have no idea.
yeah. But the point is, a lot of them had misplaced priorities, focusing far more on the religious aspect and not enough on the fact that you have to tell a story for people who might not be Christian. Uh, which is that was something I brought up with Bell, the idea of could somebody who is not is not a Christian still connect with the story as you presented it? Because I do think that
Mm.
because that was the big problem I had with a lot of those kind of fictions. It's like the only way you'd be able to connect with it is if you were already a Christian, which makes the whole thing kind of redundant. Uh, you
Well,
end up
there's
with an
always
Eiffel Tower problem.
right. Well, there's always the Wing Feather saga, whether it be the recent animated one or the books.
Mhm. I'm not familiar with that one. Huh.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's very good.
When it comes to the educational game analogy I'd use, a lot of educational games are glorified flashcards and not games. And the this is I obviously there's exceptions, like the entirety of the run of video games that were made in the early days of MECC. Your Oregon Trail, your Number Munchers, that kind of thing,
Hmm.
because those were designed as games where you approach them as a game and end up being educated in the process. Uh, but it is interesting to me that some of the stuff you brought up as inspirations were things that fall into the shonen battle manga subgenre. But we're within that, a lot of them have some sort of extra normal ability or supernatural ability that has its own set of rules. And when you decided to start writing Beyond Destiny, was it a case where you designed the characters first and then the world around it, or vice versa?
Uh, let's see. Well, wanting to take some of the little bits of the original story that I did, and I don't remember if I did the world or the characters first in that original concept, which I don't even remember the full. At the moment, I can't remember the original title of. But of course, I go outside and just kind of use my, even as an adult, use my imagination for skits, what I'd like to use in story for future projects. I believe that it was honestly a combination of both. There is the characters and abilities and the world just kind of developed around it,
Hmm.
while also I was thinking about the world and the characters just kind of fit in with it. It's sort of a strange hybrid that I can't find the proper words for
So it was a
at the
little of
moment.
column A and a little of column B.
Yeah.
Now, with with that with that in mind, um, there's like I said, there's usually some sort of power system in these kinds of settings. Obviously, you don't have that as much with DBZ because it's just key. Um, but you have that with Bleach in terms of Reiatsu. You have that in um, in Naruto with with chakra. You have that with spirit energy in Yu Yu Hakusho. You have that with Nen in Hunter x Hunter. Um, and similar matters in the likes of Soul Eater. Do you have a similar kind of um, in-universe power set for Beyond Destiny, and what were the steps in creating that?
Well, it is a spirit-based power system,
Mm-hmm.
and it's known as the Tranquil Flow, hence the subtitle there.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what it is within every being, the humanoids of this world, everyone has it,
Mm-hmm.
but and because they live in a world where it's technically more flourished than Earth in that regard, it's just more everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The humanoids are usually stronger because of it, and how it works is whenever you awaken to the realization of it, and I'm just giving like very basic bullet points here.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever someone awakens to the realization of it, even if they've seen it around them their whole life, once they realize it within themselves, it becomes manifest. It's sort of like an inner spring bursting forth, and from there they have the general assets that come with having it. And with it, you could do the most basic of things as you get older, and the more you are influenced, inspired, break through limitations and personal barriers and a myriad of other things, more stuff will be available to you. But the most basics of that you can say is healing barriers, shields, manifesting energy weapons, and eventually manifesting a very more specific weapon, but that'll be a little later on, and enhancing yourself and healing and growing deeper within yourself, growing deeper with creation and those around you. And all of this is provided by the who we would call a Holy Trinity, which is in the book it's the same people, kind of like how C.S. Lewis used Aslan, not as just a figure that kind of is like Christ, but actually was Christ in his books. This is the Holy Triune, who for these people he allows to use these powers, but how they decide to go about it is up to them. But there's consequences if they decide to go a route of destruction.
Yeah. And in that regard, what I end up conjuring just from that description is sort of what the Force was supposed to be originally. Like if you look at the way it's presented in the original Star Wars versus what it morphed into, which was a a heightened sense of understanding, uh, not far removed from the ideas of chi and cultivation that you see in wuxia. And the reason I'm that specific on it is the idea of you have to be born sensitive to it. That was never the original intent. It was, and in something like wuxia, you have it where theoretically anybody can train and can gain these abilities, but it takes a certain type of person to want to dedicate themselves to pursuing it. And it sounds like there's a similar direction with Tranquil Flow in this case. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it sounds very similar. It's also inspired, I suppose, as, let's say, you might read about the Christian mystics of old and how they speak of like awakenings and a deeper sense of wanting to draw closer to God. It's also based off that, except obviously in a fantasy setting.
Yeah.
And the more you seek, the more you can gain. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that person will have all advantages over those who may not seek as much, but you'll have more access to things. But how you go about it and how you decide to use it, well, that's all up to you. It's never a promise of superiority. It's never a promise of always winning, but it does draw you deeper into whether you want to go toward virtue or toward self-righteousness, more focused on yourself than others, and trying to take things in your own hands. And it will lead to a form of spiritual corruption, and that's a whole other bag of worms right there.
Yeah. But now with a lot of those, since you mentioned it being a fantasy setting, that's a wide net. So one of the things I'd like to get into is what style of fantasy are we dealing with? Are we dealing with the more strict forms that are trying to be a fantastical version of of some medieval era? Are we dealing with um, a more anachronistic time where you have those classical elements, but also mixes of modern elements? Um, you know, to
I would
use where would it be on that particular pendulum?
I would say, well, the story does take place in what I would consider modern day, but there are still ancient ruins still scattered about the world, and there are still tribes, even though they're more in tune with how everyone else is doing. So there's no like um, lost civilization kind of thing. But a lot of people still try to keep the ancient ways with them, with like constant reprints of so like ancient manuscripts that they keep with them. They read them, and they remember the past, because without that, obviously, you don't want to have repeats if you're not prepared. But though it is in a modern setting, there's still a lot of the mystical fantasy elements. So, despite the fact you may see vehicles, for example, in this world,
Hmm.
you're still going to be seeing people meditating, going into the forests, and enjoying things like more into that than obsession with technology. There is technology, but you're going to see people that also go about the old way. So,
In
and
that
not everyone's like that. Some people just don't care in the world, but some of them still want to keep a balance of the old and the new.
Yeah. In that regard, I suppose it would be apropos to refer to it as what I call Gestalt fantasy, which that is the term that I use to describe some of the um, mix of fantasy and modern elements that you see in games like the Tales of series or certain Final Fantasy entries. Um,
Oh, I
and
love the Tale series.
certain anime like Orphan or Slayers, where there's certainly high fantasy, but not high fantasy in the sense of something like Lord of the Rings is. Um, it's it's a mix of elements, and it definitely sounds like that's the vein in this. Um, but would it be fair of me to assume that since these kind of stories usually have an ensemble of multiple characters,
Hmm.
and oftentimes multiple people who have some access to these extra normal abilities, but they have different skill sets or different specializations. Is that the case with your series?
Oh yeah, there are a multitude of characters. Some are mentioned barely, while the main cast is obviously mentioned multiple times. There's the group of late teens, and in my book, you're not considered an adult until you're 20. So
Hmm.
even if they're like 18, they're still considered teens.
Hmm.
And then you have the adults, which are doing the B plot, I guess you could say, or the other side of the plot. Same plot, they're just on the other side of it.
Hmm. I can certainly get that. And with that in mind, before you even started, did you end up writing what's known in some circles as a series Bible? Um, I didn't come up with the wording. That's just what it's referred to. That's usually a document that's used in certain TV or comic book productions, for instance, to keep everybody's characters consistent.
Right.
Um,
Uh, I know there was a little stuff written down, but and honestly, I do need to have an actual document. I probably should also print it out physically just in case, or at least uh have a USB. And that actually I do. I could easily just do it like that and only access it when I want to. So even if something happened to my laptop, I know it'd be fine. But generally, I do know what everything is. Though though for the sake of it, I do need to just have everything written down. But this book and the book to come are consistent with one another. Uh, but I do plan on having the generalizations written down and more specifics as time goes on. Like right now, I don't have full detailed descriptions of all the characters, like from eye color to particular height or anything like that. But it's one of those things that you'll know more of in like the third book, when everyone's going to be given a ton more detail for visual reference.
mhm.
but they have a basic. So people can just use their imaginations at the moment. It does give a basic understanding of kind of what they look like.
Yeah.
So people can have some fun with that.
Hmm. And you had mentioned that this first book was already released, but you plan on redoing that. Oh, tell me about that. Was it a case of just not liking how the original one was developed? What sort of things happened that led you to want to do a do-over?
Well, I first started officially wanting to do this in late 2018, and it was released in 2020 in the summer. And well, things were kind of chaotic at that time anyway.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even aware at whenever I was going through the book of how many errors, grammatical errors, there were, how many things were written that could have sounded so much better, because some of it sounded so unrealistic that even I, who wrote this, could look back and realize no, just no, 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 no. So it was in 2021. I was already thinking, yeah, I should probably do a revision, and which of course I did. But what led me to do it a little quicker, and I guess you could definitely say it's motivation. An ex-friend of mine, who, that's a whole different can of worms right there, decided that quote unquote help me. He let a YouTuber who's known for reviewing books, and if these books are known for being bad, he will tear them asunder without a doubt. Like, this guy took 5 parts to rip asunder Empress Teresa.
Hmm.
And he told me about it and said, "Oh, any publicity is good publicity." And I wanted to say some things, but I had to calm myself down. I found this guy on Twitter and asked him, "Please do not review this. I am the author, and wait for the review of the renewal of it." And he said, "Sure." And he was a really polite guy about it. And I kept him updated through the process, and it took almost a year, but it finally happened. And I know he's busy doing other stuff, and that's perfectly fine if he has other stuff that he's got a busy schedule as is. But yeah, that would have been so difficult for me to promote a revised version if everyone else is riffing so freaking hard on the original being grammatically bad, sounding bad, even by my own admission. And I was going through a lot of emotional stuff at the time, and the C virus, will just say, that was messing everyone over. So that was one reason I guess I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's revised. It's not perfect, obviously. It's got a few errors that I managed to discover in there, but nowhere near enough to ruin the story at all. At that point, it's just a couple was missed. It's no big deal.
Hmm. And since this is book 1, I'm guessing that you have a planned arc that you are going to be exploring further on. Have you already outlined that arc?
Generally, yes. I do know there's the main arc, and anything after that, or I'm thinking of either doing a main arc or 2 sets of big arcs. Like, one big story will be done, but another good story will take place after that. But ideas for side stories, and like maybe the characters going to the library and actually reading history books, and those history books that they're reading is the story for that book. It could be wars of the past of characters that were once alive, and what kind of influence they had on particular regions, and what their story was all about, and what led up to why they're remembered in the modern era, and the lessons that the characters can learn from them, those involved with them. And I do have plans to have people from other worlds, including spiritually powered people from Earth, join in the fray eventually. But that's sort of a different plot device going on there. But the second book is, there will be a little character development, but it's also going to focus on what the villains, the ne'er-do-wells that were barely mentioned in the first book are mostly up to, without giving everything away.
Mm-hmm.
And book 3 onward, you're going to see more about what their secret plan actually is, like what they were planning this whole time. And that's where the real hitting the wall character development is going to hit for these youngsters. who by then they'll be adults, but there's going to be a lot of it's kind of like when you get to know someone for like a month or so, and then after that you start seeing more of their flaws, and eventually certain aspects of them that hit the wall, and you wonder how they're going to get past this, how they're going to learn from this, what's going to happen, what's going to be the consequences, how are they going to grow from this, not just in combat. No, I'm also referring to outside of combat in personality.
Oh yeah, I can certainly get that. Uh, with that in mind, um, when it comes to like, were there any concepts that you had when developing it that you ended up writing yourself into a corner and had to cut something off, or just drop it?
Whenever I was doing the revised version, there I had to take chunks of certain conversations out, because either they were just too much, or they really just didn't fit the overall thing, the overall narrative. They were just kind of there to take up space. So I just mostly trimmed it down, and that's what I've been doing in editing the sequel, which it ain't out, but I've been trimming the fat, so to speak, and I need to honestly get back on it because I need to go through it at least one more time. But as for major stuff I just cut out, I can't remember some of the big stuff. I just know I've taken out quite a few paragraphs worth of dialogue, that, or even descriptions, that really just didn't need to be there in the first place, because as I said, they were just taking up space and it would have bored the people. Now that doesn't mean I'm against like Tolkien style descriptions of areas. I love that. But whenever a conversation feels too forced or too cliche, it had to get cut.
Yeah. You know, you describe it as tranquil flow, and you use a water splash on the cover. What led you to go with a flow kind of concept for it?
Well, it's also how the tranquil flow itself works, and there are different stages of it when people discover that about themselves. As a matter of fact, the first set of books are going to be describing the aspects of flow as you grow deeper into it. But the tranquil part of it is, and like, let's say you're using your flow for whatever. The more calm your flow is, the more tranquil it is, the more it can actually move. It's kind of like when you see like a small river or a creek. It doesn't have to be a raging river or a crazy creek. It can just be a gentle one, and yet it still has enough to do what it needs to do. Maybe to turn a water wheel or whatever. Well, that's an interesting concept, because with this, the more you keep your inner self under control, so to speak, the more you can actually do without it going crazy. And like with water, well, it fits the whole flow concept, because with water, it'll fit in anything it's able to go into. So it's kind of like your body is the vessel for it.
Oh, yeah.
But whenever you use it, I guess you could say it's almost like when you see a Dragon Ball character using their ki and powering up. That's that energy coming out and just going out there. So the more it's stirred up without going insanely crazy, the better it is. The better you are at using your ability. And as for the picture, the water obviously represents the flow, but the sword and shield, even though that's not how they actually look in the story, I just told the editor to find a sword and shield, more specifically an arming sword and a round shield, because two of the characters in there are able to manifest very specific weapons. And as I mentioned before, there are energy weapons you can manifest, but your more specific weapons, I guess you could say the inspiration of Bleach kind of comes from that, because how every Soul Reaper has their own unique Zanbakuto. So does anyone have their own unique weapon, whether it be conventional or not so conventional in this world. So you could have a group of people that manifest specific swords, or even someone that has a shield. And the two main characters, I say main, there's a lot of main ones, but the two specifically do use those.
Oh yeah, I can certainly get that, and it's an interesting choice to go with an arming sword when so many people want to go with long swords. uh, I've I've talked at length about how a lot of a lot of fantasy fiction treats certain types of swords as this one size fits all affair, whether it be long swords or in some cases great swords. And you know, you look at swords throughout history, and there's interesting ones that might be better fits instead of just giving everybody a sword and board, which I've said is the worst way to equip, is the most boring way to equip somebody. I'm more fond of something like a Kopesh, for instance. Those bronze swords that were in Egypt.
Oh yeah.
I've often called them an axe cosplaying as a sword. Or the Hayaha, which isn't a sword, it's a short spear, but the interesting thing about it is the back end is flattened, so it can be used like a club. But an arming sword is an interesting and kind of deliberate choice. I'm curious what made you pick that over other types of swords.
Well, the leading female character is the one who manifests her sword, and the reason I went for this is I believe it would make for a great balanced starting weapon for her. I mean, she'll use it even in advanced settings as she progresses as a character, but out of any weapon she would be able to use, the arming sword would be a great balance of what she needs for slashing, piercing, parrying, and the fact that the tactics you can use with the crossguard and even the pommel. And in this spiritual case, as a manifested weapon, it may not just be an ordinary pommel. It could be something that does something else as well, because when you involve spiritual abilities in this, your eyes will deceive you. I mean, they can give you hints, but at the end of the day, if you only go by what you see and don't use a little wisdom, you are more than likely going to fail against your opponent.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I immediately thought of Ichimaru Jin's particular Zanpakuto. I mean, you look at it at the start, it just seems like, wait, why is he using a wakizashi instead of a full-on katana? Then you learn very quickly that there's a reason its name translates to God's Spear. You know, there's been plenty of those, and since I suppose if I were to use a real world example, consider the surprise scout knife that's used by the Spetsnaz.
Oh yeah, that thing.
You know, it looks like a knife, even though the handle looks a little overbuilt, but that's because it's got a hidden spring.
I remember learning about that from Deadliest Warrior.
And yeah, it's a risk firing the thing, but if you're that close, then you can probably fire it without having to worry about missing.
True.
Or I do remember this. I do remember looking at the E-tool and then concepting a shovel that could splay out to be more like an axe.
Oh yeah, I've heard about shovels being used in. Oh, sorry, cat on my lap, fur got in my mouth. But let's see. In a fantasy setting, I've definitely seen shovels used as weapons, whether it be the Mar anime where the side character has a quote unquote battle shovel, or you have characters like Shovel Knight, or you have the old man Rule from Wok Fu, and I think that shovel is actually inspired that I've learned recently from monk shovels used, I think, in ancient. I think it was yes, and those the fact that those were real, that was just flipping awesome.
Yeah, I do remember putting some people down a rabbit hole when they saw Ikaku's spear, and the fact that on one end it is equal parts a Guandao and a Sansetsu. Sansetsu is the name for like the 3-section staff.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, and you look throughout different cultures and different histories, you find a wide variety of different types of melee weapons that can be explored, uh, which is why I've been so critical of just using the longsword. I think I think for one of the test projects with the FF Legend thing I've been developing, um, one of the sample characters picked Chocobo Knight so that they're going to be on a Chocobo, and I said, you know what? Let's go with the classics. Let's go with a cavalry saber. You know, just reach the thing out, and suddenly that person has no head.
Yeah.
It kind of helped that around that time I was playing Battlefield 1, which the campaign of that made me commit so many war crimes I may as well be an honorary Canadian. But
Oh, goodness gracious.
there's a lot of things that have been said about the fact that the Geneva Convention was basically the world saying to Canada, "Don't do that shit again."
For some people, and I've heard this joke from a friend before, for some people, it's not simply you could go from the Geneva Convention to simply the Geneva Suggestion.
Yes. Oh. And I'll leave. And it's definitely a case of just showing what's there, especially since I do remember doing a bit of digging when it came to arming swords. They are a successor to Viking swords.
Mm.
And if you look at the way Viking Age swords were designed, you look at an arming sword, you can kind of see the heritage.
Yeah.
And of course, the Viking sword can trace its heritage to just repurposing repurposing things like Roman swords.
Right.
You know that one leads to the next in that regard. And it's a good way to expand on the lineage of a concept. To use an example, I remember some people saying that it cheapens the Buster Sword when it was revealed that Angeal was the original owner of it. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's just adding to the legend of the thing.
True. Yeah, I played Crisis Core, and the fact that there's that thing probably even, I don't know how many wielders held that thing even before Angeal, but the way he quote unquote uses it kind of puts in mind of Kenshin Himura, because of how Kenshin uses the reverse blade of his, and while Angeal he typically just sticks to the blunt side because that thing is so devastating. I guess he just doesn't want to be known as a crazy massacre kind of man, so he uses his intense power wisely and typically sticks with a
standard soldier sword.
Yeah, like kind of like how Zack Fair originally started with.
And there is also the fact that I don't think anyone used it before him because his parents went broke trying to get it made when he joined Soldier.
It's been a while since I played that.
And even though he says the reason he doesn't use it is because use causes wear and tear, I think there's a big motif in Crisis Core about this sense of personal honor, the idea of the soldier honor that Zack often talks about, which is something he gets from Angeal. And because of that, what you end up seeing when you get the full tapestry is this is a sword that has been carrying a certain ideal. And instead of reducing the legacy or restricting it, it does the opposite. I suppose the counterexample of what not to do in expanding lore on that sense is the light and dark spirit thing that happened with the Legend of Korra.
Yeah.
Which we did a whole episode reconstructing Legend of Korra, and I admitted that was the thing that made me snap, because you're introducing the concept of absolute good and absolute evil into a mythos that was not designed with it in mind. Like, you introduce those kind of spirits into something like Star Wars, nobody's gonna bat an eye because it's already built with that absolute binary. But Wuxia, which Avatar very much is far more shades of gray, not absolute good and evil. And there's nothing wrong with either approach, but it's a case of when you pick one, you gotta stick to that lane. You can't do, but trying to do both is spinning plates.
I remember back in 2006, my cousin when the first Avatar was gaining traction. I enjoyed Nickelodeon growing up. That's just the facts. I'm from the 90s. I saw Nickelodeon at its peak. But then he was telling me about this show that was almost as good as anime. I'm like, oh, come on, dude, it's Nickelodeon. Then I just watched an episode, and the best way to describe it is now I understand what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And though I didn't see every episode, I saw a good chunk of the original series, and it was very, very well done. But even though the series, after the concepts after that and everything you mentioned and what they've been doing with it since seems very, it feels like it's going pretty shaky. I can easily say that the original Avatar it'll never get old. It's just that good.
Yeah. The follow-ups, I referred to them as a case of missing the point. Misunderstanding what brought them to the dance. But with that in mind, do you have a set release date in mind when it comes to the re-release of the first book, or is that still up in the air at this point?
Oh, well, the book that you're seeing now on screen, and I'm sorry if I never did mention it. This book right here is actually the re-release because of the original one just being so issue-y with all the grammatical errors, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So the revised version is the true canonical start of the series. I actually had to rename one of the characters just slightly to go with what I was wanting to do with that character later on. So there is a purpose to her name. Her name is Serena Moonflower, and the term Moonflower for her will play a part later on. And it's not a surname because on this world that they're on, they don't have surnames. And I will eventually get into how their names are actually given, but everyone's name has a reason behind it, unless they just want to try to be edgy and try to rename themselves later on in life, thus derailing themselves from a purpose and just honestly going off the rails into the unknown and not even knowing how hard they're going to crash, so to speak. But that's for the sequel. I don't have a set release date on it yet. There's actually a teaser at the end of the first book that gives the epilogue. No, not epilogue. The prologue. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'll kind of give a poetic introduction to book 2, which is going to be called Inner Garden, and that explores another part of the Tranquil Flow itself. More of a meditative part that will be brought up within the story. But as for the book right now, it is released. I actually did the renewal for it with my publisher recently, and so that is currently available. But let's see. There's still some things for me to think about for the future, like certain details. Right now, some of it is grounded, while some of it is still, I guess you could say, floating down to be grounded. Like ideas, like at this certain point, where am I going to go with this? at this certain point. Where am I going to go with that?
Mm-hmm.
Until I get to those crossroads, or at least I guess you could say see them from a distance, everything else is fairly grounded. So until then, it's all right. It's all right as is until I get to that point of now I have to decide where this part of the story has to go, where this character is going to go, how this is going to work.
Oh, yeah.
But until then, I'm just kind of focusing on getting people interested in the lore. And the book itself has an interesting setting, and then there's the actual story itself, which is a pretty soft start for the first book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule and braving time zone hell to come over to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here.
Well, thank you for having me. Actually, if we got maybe a few minutes left, would it be all right if I kind of brought, and I can easily keep this in under 10 minutes, bring up the setting and story of the first book real quick?
Yeah, I think we can spare a few minutes for that.
All right. Well, the setting takes place on a planet called Mystaria, which has 3 inhabitable moons: Emotia, Nosdam, and Solirit. All inhabitable, all have the whole spiritual thing, as I mentioned before. And the humanoids on this world are known as Harmonians, and they have traits, whether they be elemental or even animalistic, and they all have the tranquil flow. And the reason they have it originally was supposed to be for peaceful reasons, but during the ancient times, monsters known as the Void came along, and they were usually created from the darkness of other people. So they have these abilities to also fight against them, and as they grow, their weapons grow, their powers grow against them. And sometimes the Holy Triune will choose someone called a sage to lead the people into whatever they actually need, while at the same time there's a world level threat called a mage, and they're like the opposite, and they have limited control over these monsters.
Yep.
And spiritual abilities can be corrupted, which could lead to being tainted, and for a very small percent of people they could become a mage or someone associated with that. As for the story itself, it takes place modern day. 2 young people, a partial trait fox young man named Guardius, his specialty is defensive tactics with his shield, is excited for his old friend from a village to be in his new hometown. Her name is Serena Moonflower, as I mentioned. She's the sword wielder. To move back to finally be in the same town with him again. And as the kids are kind of just doing their thing, the adults are trying to uncover a mystery of a very, very bizarre void release that doesn't typically occur at all. And during the story, you hear they interview a guy who has PTSD, who is an ex-mercenary, and they're trying to figure out why this void release even happened. Is there a mage involved? And while the kids are just kind of semi-involved at this point, but they're mostly doing training with their other friends of different traits and abilities. And it's a soft start. As for book 2, it leads more into a little bit what they're doing, what the villains are doing, so you get to see what they're going into, what's going on, but you don't learn the whole plan because that's too much given away. But it will lead into something big as the series progresses. And there are tons of fights that are detailed and inspired by anime, with the power system that I try to make sure isn't too crazy like Dragon Ball, but something akin to maybe Bleach to an extent without it being too much. And I hope that wasn't too long of an explanation, but at least now you get the gist of the soft start of the book. And the reason it's a soft start is just to get people introduced. So no crazy big bad fight in the end or character flaws every 5 pages. It's just to kind of get you relaxed in.
Setting the overture, essentially.
Indeed.
Yeah. But with that said, as always, a sincere thanks for you for coming all the way to my monastery, and just as sincere of a thanks to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come on and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
내 내 조심히